let me introduce you to Matthew Felix. And Matthew is an author. I think it's 4 books.
4 books.
And he's a certified human potential life coach. He's a speaker. He edits, designs, and publishes and markets books for other authors. And he's hosted multiple podcasts. And he's also involved with the San Francisco Writers Conference. And I don't know, some of you may know, I have a secret desire to write a book. And so I may be tapping into Matthew. And so he's just a wealth of information. He does retreats and helps people with wellness, and he's a fascinating individual and so gifted. So Matthew, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Christy. Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thanks to John, Anna, and Cindy for having me, and of course for all of you for being here on this Friday morning, this Good Friday. I really appreciate it, and I'm so excited and honored to be back. So thanks for having me back. Yeah, just a little bit more about me. I think Christy mostly covered it, but in addition to my human potential life coaching certification, I also have certifications in intuition medicine, which obviously plays into what we're going to talk about today, and Heart Math's Building Personal Resilience. And I'm also currently pursuing a certification in somatics and nervous system, which I'm really excited about. Christy mentioned that I'm the author of 4 books, and then I help others write, edit, publish, and market books as well. So yes, Christy, you know where to find me. My last book actually was co-written for a client. I wrote that with a client, and that was a lot of fun. But for anyone who's in San Francisco or the North Bay, just a quick shout out to my writing world. Or to my writing endeavors. I'm going to be in conversation with Isabel Allende on May 10th at Dominican University in San Rafael, for anyone who might happen to be up here and interested in that. I'm really excited to get to chat with her. She sold 77 million books. So that was an unexpected opportunity I can't wait to do. But one of my other books is about a Spaniard's awakening to his intuition. And I've also spoken about intuition in online series and as part of some of the retreats that I do that Christy just mentioned, including a new one that I'm just launching. Actually, this is the first time we're sort of announcing it publicly. I've just developed with a friend, Kieran Byrne, a performance, resilience, and stress management day-long retreat for a corporate audience that also includes intuition, because for reasons we're going to discuss today, I feel that that's really an important piece that's often not included. And but the reason I'm going to talk about intuition today is sort of interesting, at least it's interesting to me. So when I spoke to PRG over a year ago now, it was about navigating transitions. And at the time, I sort of wondered, you have to know your audience, right? Whether you're writing or whether you're presenting. And I sort of wondered, would it seem too woo-woo? Would this be the right time and place to discuss it? But I followed my intuition, and I did include, a section about that in that presentation about navigating transitions. Well, I was really surprised at the end during the Q&A when that's basically almost everything that all the questions and everything that people wanted to talk about in the Q&A was about intuition, which really blew me away. And I was really excited about, because I love this topic. And so I went back to Christy a few months later and said, given that unexpected interest, maybe it would make sense, and there would be an appetite in this group to talk about that, and specifically how it might apply to the workday and to our workplaces. So that's how we got here more than a year later, like I said, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, before we do, 2 things. If you could please have a paper and pen and paper handy, because I am going to ask you to do 2 quick writing exercises. I can't shake the writing part of me, so that's going to be a quick part of this. And then, of course, most of you are on mute, but there might be times when we have some discussions, so please just make sure that the cell phone ringers are off. Okay, so what do we mean by intuition, right? You're all here, you all have a sense for it. But as I say in my novel, there's probably as many definitions for intuition as there are people to ask. And so let's look to Merriam-Webster, which is always sort of my go-to when I need a definitive definition. So Merriam-Webster defines intuition as knowing or sensing without the use of reason, but it also has other sub-definitions such as idea, instinct, sixth sense, and on and on. And so for purposes of today's conversation, let's use that first definition, which is knowing or sensing without the use of reason. Now, despite the fact that contemporary Western society has largely, if not entirely, socialized us not to lend credence to things that we can't explain rationally, or at least hope to, eventually, many of us aren't quite ready to dismiss our intuition, even if we're not quite sure again what it is or how we might connect with it. And I, of course, am not the only one who thinks so. Steve Jobs famously said, quote, that intuition is, quote, more powerful than intellect. And Einstein extolled the role that intuition played in his process by saying, quote, all great achievements of science must start from intuitive knowledge. I believe in intuition and inspiration. At times, I feel certain I am right while not knowing the reason. So now that we have a working definition of intuition, I'd like to do, before we go any further, a quick exercise. And I'm going to ask you 4 questions, really 2 questions with sort of sub-questions for each of the 2 main questions. One is, I'd like you to take a moment and write down, when have you followed your intuition and been glad that you did? And what was that experience like for you? So that's the first 2 questions, I guess. The second corollary questions are, when have you not followed your intuition and regretted it? And what was that experience like for you? So just take a couple minutes to reflect on that and write that down, and then we will proceed. Okay, just take another few seconds and sort of wrap up. And of course, you can revisit that after. So as you are sort of wrapping up your reflections, just a little bit about sort of why this is such an interesting topic to me, sort of how it came to my awareness on a personal level. So I had been working in the corporate world, doing project management, program management, process engineering, business analyst roles. And I just kept getting to this point where I realized I need to take some time off and explore my creativity. I just knew that there was something else or additional that I wanted to do with my life, and then I needed kind of time to really explore what that was. So I ran off to Spain for 6 months. And as the day-to-day, the chaos of my day-to-day, the obligations and distractions and responsibilities of my day-to-day sort of fell by the wayside because I had extracted myself from all of that, I started to notice my inner voice with increasing clarity. I started getting feelings about things I should do or clear guidance when I was struggling with a decision. And this was on a different level than anything I had ever experienced before. Because I don't know that I'd even given any conscious attention to my intuition before that. And so the fact that it was so novel made it that much more remarkable and got my attention. And that's what led to my first novel about a young Spaniard's awakening to his intuition, like I said. And it's what has led now to this ongoing fascination with intuition. So now that we've defined intuition, now that you've reflected a little bit about your own experiences with it, I'd like to go further and divide intuition into 2 primary categories. And just for, it's a little bit of an oversimplification, but given the context and the time we have today, I'm going to stick with 2 definitions. And one is unconscious intuition, and the other is what we're going to call superconscious intuition. And what they have in common is that definition that we've started with, knowing or sensing without the use of reason, although I'm going to add the conscious use of reason. So knowing or sensing without the conscious use of reason, that applies to both. So let's look first at unconscious intuition, which can go by a few other names. We can call it unconscious or non-conscious intuition, but it's also known as implicit learning or implicit knowledge. But whatever we call it by, this is the intuition whereby the line of thinking that considers intuition a faculty with a logical explanation. It's not that it doesn't involve reason, it's that we're not aware of the reasoning that's going on. This is the intuition that Malcolm Gladwell refers to in his bestseller, Blink, The Power of Thinking Without Thinking. In Blink, he refers to this type of intuition as taking place in the, quote, adaptive unconscious, which he explains is, quote, thought of as a kind of giant computer that quickly and quietly processes a lot of the data we need in order to keep functioning as human beings. But what data is he talking about? Well, as noted in the British Journal of Psychology, in Frontiers of Entrepreneurship Research, and elsewhere, and this is where we get our first look at some of the science behind intuition, a number of pattern recognition models have been developed that show how this fast type of intuitive decision-making can be understood in terms of neural processes. In other words, there are cognitive functions going on behind the scenes, that computer that Malcolm refers to, that we're not necessarily aware of. And so basically what's happening is pattern matching. So the brain, that computer that we're not aware of, is looking at our present situation, and it's comparing it to previously lived situations and lessons that we've drawn from those situations and seeing whether there's a match. And if there is a match, we're able to make a really quick decision based on the past. But this is all happening, again, behind the scenes, so we're not aware of it. It's also known as dual process theory, right? Because on one level, we are aware of what's going on in the present moment, but on the other, we have this other process going on. So an example of this is a doctor or a nurse who walks into a patient's room and they know right away that that patient is in crisis. And they don't know why or how, and they don't stop to engage their rational mind because that might actually slow them down, right? They know that this patient is in crisis and they do what needs to be done in that moment. And so that's going on behind the scenes. They can't explain how or why they know. They just do, and they're able to act in the moment. And sometimes that might be the difference between life and death. Another example of this could be body language, which is you and I might be in a conversation and you're telling me how happy you are, but I just have this gut feeling they're not telling me the truth. There's something else going on. Well, that might be consciously, I might only be seeing and hearing what you're telling me. Unconsciously, I may be picking up on body language cues that are so subtle. Again, they're not making it to this level of awareness, but they are to this unconscious level, which is giving me additional insight and information into what's really going on and to how you might actually be feeling that there is more going on. So that's unconscious intuition or non-conscious intuition. We also have, like I said, the other that we're going to talk about today, which is superconscious intuition. And this also has another name. It can also be referred to as non-local intuition. So this is the belief that our intuition is coming from someplace greater than ourselves, right? This is the more mystical or woo-woo or the one that doesn't have the logical explanation. So this is whether it's coming from that someplace greater, like I said, God, the universe, source, whatever your worldview or belief system, however you sort of think of that something greater, if you think of that something greater. This is the intuition whereby we know something without there being, again, any sort of logical explanation or even the possibility of one. The knowledge just comes to us directly. It's not the result of some sort of readily explainable unconscious process going on in our brains, like the unconscious one. And in these instances, there simply isn't any data for our brains to process. And so that's how we know. So this is the sort of intuition that I personally experienced when I was driving down Highway 1 and I got the feeling, and I often refer to intuition as sort of more than a feeling, not quite a voice, right? And so I got this feeling and I kind of had this voice, not a literal disembodied voice, but it was clear enough that I got the message I was supposed to turn off to the side of the road, out of the blue, right? And I thought, I don't want to turn off. Where is this coming from? I'm driving down Highway 1. I have no desire to stop. Nothing's going on that makes me feel like I need to stop. So I started arguing with that voice. And when I started arguing with that voice, I realized, wait, something's going on here that's beyond me, right? So I laughed, I started to turn off to the side of the road, and then I got the sensation, the knowing, not here, the next one. It was that specific. And this was not usual for me. I'm not a psychic or a medium or anything like that. So for me, this was very, very strange. So again, I just laughed out loud, but I thought I was writing my novel at the time. So I thought, well, if I'm writing a novel about intuition, I guess I have to listen to this. So I turned off at the second turn off. And as I got out of the car, I was on Highway 1, like I said, so just 2 lanes. As I got out of the car, I looked up on the embankment. There was an embankment on the other side of the road, and a mountain lion jumped over the embankment at that exact time. Well, the other part of the story is I had just seen a mountain lion because of another intuitive experience less than an hour before, which I assume is statistically impossible. So the point, it was one of the strangest, most fascinating days of my life. But the point here for our conversation is that, I wasn't in this experience, I wasn't somehow privy to data that my unconscious was able to process without me knowing it. There was no sign saying, stop here for on-demand mountain lion encounters, right? Something else is going on. So what does science have to say about this type of intuition, which on the surface might not seem so scientific, right? In his book, Educating Intuition, published by University of Chicago Press, Robin Hogarth explains that, quote, a variety of experiments show that non-local intuition cannot be explained by flaws in experimental design or research methods, statistical techniques, chance, or selective reporting of results. So in other words, they can't explain it. Mainstream science can't explain it or dismiss it or just say it's not a thing. And while an article in the American Psychological Association's Journal of Personality and Social Psychology concedes that, quote, the study of non-local intuition has been fraught with debate in the scientific community, it also cites a meta-analysis of 9 experiences in which in 8 of the 9 studies, subjects had statistically significant physiological responses to events before they happened, which is to say, to oversimplify, that the heart, the body knew something was about to happen before the brain did. Now, so here we have science, mainstream science, acknowledging that something's going on, but they can't explain it. So that, at least insofar as the research that I've done, that's kind of where mainstream science is with this sort of intuition. But in my experience, and in a lot of your experiences, because I'm sure many of you have had these sort of inexplicable intuitive experiences, and some of you probably have not, but in my experiences, both types of intuition are valid, both in our day-to-day lives and in the workplace. And what's more, the process for accessing them is the same, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. But first, how and why might intuition matter in the workplace? Well, in business, we prioritize, if not idolize, data, right? We love gathering and analyzing and forecasting with data. In business, the rational mind rules. Or does it? In Roger Lowenstein's biography, Buffett, The Making of an American Capitalist, Warren Buffett is quoted as saying, quote, the best thing I did was to choose the right heroes. And the second best thing I did was to trust my intuition and not overanalyze things. In his book, Losing My Virginity, Richard Branson says, quote, I rely far more on my gut instinct than researching huge amounts of statistics. And those are just a couple of well-known examples. A 2024 Fast Company article explored, quote, how to tap into your intuition to predict the future more effectively. Yale Insights noted that, quote, the best leaders use intuition. A Forbes article examined, quote, why intuitive leaders are the most successful. And in his book, Decisive Intuition, Use Your Gut Instincts to Make Smart Business Decisions, CEO Rick Snyder also cites the US military's interest in intuition. He notes that, quote, the Office of Naval Research embarked on a 4-year, $3.85 million research project to explore intuition and what they called spidey sense in sailors and Marines, which they believed could save lives. So if the US military sees the potential in intuition to explore it and potentially apply it, it seems that it probably behooves us to consider how and where it might make sense to bring it into consideration in the workplace. But I bring all this up now to underscore that our intuition is another valuable, if not invaluable, resource, and it's one that's often overlooked, if not outright discounted. Well, what might be the benefits if we didn't overlook or discount it? Well, when you're attuned to your intuition, you're able to make decisions easier, you're able to make them more quickly, You don't have to go in as many circles. You spend a lot less time in analysis paralysis because you go with your gut, right? You don't need to validate the decision from 30 different angles necessarily. That also gives you greater clarity and confidence when you take the actions that are based on those decisions. Intuition can make it easier to prioritize. It can facilitate creativity, both in the sense of helping us to be more innovative, but also insofar as how we're approaching problems and solving problems, right? Because when you're attuned to your intuition, the thoughts and the ideas are just flowing. Your rational mind isn't coming in to censor or stop or get in the way or ask for justifications. Instead, you're allowing what comes up to come up. And that opens you to insights and perspectives and ideas that you likely wouldn't have had otherwise. And lastly, I'll just say that you're less encumbered by perfectionism. Again, if I feel it in my bones, I might not feel the need to justify it rationally in a way that I might ordinarily, and I might just proceed and move forward more quickly and again with greater confidence. In decisive intuition, which I just cited, Snyder also explains that, quote, once intuitive decision-making is developed and practiced, a team doesn't need 27 meetings to come to an agreement. Intuition applied to business by integrating inner knowledge with logic and critical thinking creates a distinct advantage. And this is a huge point that I've implied but haven't said explicitly. I'm not arguing here. I'm not advocating that we forget about reason and only do everything intuitively, right? That is obviously, or at least I hope it's obvious that that is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we have two tools at our disposal, and we historically, most of us, maybe not all of us, but most of us have probably been taught and got comfortable with the one tool to the detriment of this other tool over here that, especially when working together, can be really effective. Because sometimes we're using reason when it's not the best tool, when it might make more sense, pun intended, to check in with our intuition. A 2009 study entitled, quote, Intuition in Organizations, Implications for Strategic Management, led by Gerard Hodgkinson at Leeds University Business School, noted that in one study of top executives, those who combined intuition with analysis outperformed those who relied solely on rational decision-making in terms of stock price growth, profitability, and shareholder value over the long term. So, assuming that we want to leverage this other resource that we might not have paid much, if any, attention to, how do we do that? How do we develop our intuition? And I want to underscore that it is something we develop. I'm going to give you a 4-step approach, but you need to actually practice these steps to develop your intuition over time. An intellectual understanding isn't enough, right? That's the rational mind world. This is something that you have to actually experience. And the 4 steps, which of course we're going to look at in detail one by one, but the 4 steps just to sort of contextualize: create the space, pay attention, learn to distinguish, and develop trust. Okay, so let's look at the first step. There has to be space for our intuition to be heard or felt. Now, some of us might be more open, we might be more intuitive just naturally, but most of us probably have to create that space and do so more consciously. It's very hard to hear our inner voice or pay attention to what's going on in our body if we're caught up in everything that's going on us, especially the mental chatter, right? If we're stuck here, stuck in our heads, spinning, again, maybe an analysis paralysis, or just overwhelmed, that mental chatter, if that's so loud, even if the unconscious intuition, for example, is sending me insight or guidance or ideas or whatever it might be, if the mental chatter is so loud, I might not hear that, right? I might miss that intuition. And as I mentioned, one of the reasons that I sort of awoke to my intuition when I went to Spain those many years ago was because the distractions and obligations and responsibilities had sort of fallen to the side. And so that space in my case was sort of created naturally. And that's why I started hearing my intuition in a way and experiencing it in a way that I hadn't until then. We can't all run off to Spain for 6 months, unfortunately. It's a nice place. But the good news is we don't have to. So what can we do? Well, to create space to oversimplify, there are 2 things we need to do. One is, again, clear our heads, calm that mental chatter. We might not be able to stop it altogether. Hopefully we can, but at least calm that mental chatter. That's the first thing. Get out of our heads, so to speak, and get into our bodies. And how do we get into our bodies? Well, physical exercise, dance, massage, relaxation, body work. Um, but at work, for example, I might meditate before I go to work, right? That's a really obvious example of a way to clear my head, calm the thoughts, and get into my body that sets me up in a different sort of state of mind and body awareness before I even go into work. At work, I might meditate at lunch. I might make the time to actually take my lunch and take a walk outside in nature if I have access to that, right? There are little things that we can do. I can do breathing or other exercises as I start to find myself really amping up and really getting stuck in my head that bring me back down and calm me and ground and center me again. And there's lots of exercises that we could talk about, but we don't have time for today. There are lots of breathing exercises that lots of you are probably already familiar with that can help with that. But the point is, I need to get out of my head and into my body to help facilitate that connection with my intuition. Okay, so before I go to the second step, which is paying attention, I'd like to do another quick exercise, if I may, if you are willing and interested. And I'd like you to get your pen and paper out again. And for 2.5 minutes, I'm going to ask you, or maybe 2 minutes, I'm going to ask you to simply write down without stopping whatever thoughts, feelings, or ideas arise for you about your intuition. So the prompt here is just to write about your intuition. Don't worry about grammar, punctuation, or even making sense. The point is just for 2 minutes to get into the flow and just write whatever thoughts, ideas, feelings, experiences come to mind and onto the paper about your intuition. Just let the words flow. If you happen to get stuck and can't think of anything, write about being stuck if you don't want to write about your intuition. But let go of any expectations and just see this as an exploration. So go ahead and take 2 minutes now and just write. Okay, just take another few seconds. Okay. So any writers here or anyone who has explored their creativity, maybe through the artist way, for example, might be familiar with morning pages. You'll be familiar with this exercise, which is, of course, well, not necessarily of course, but which is called free writing for reasons that are probably obvious. But why do we just do it now? Why is it, and how is it relevant to what we're discussing today? Well, my hope is that this really brief exercise just gave you at least a taste of an experiential understanding of, one, how the rational mind can get in the way and what that feels like. You know, how it needs rules and parameters and justifications. Well, what am I supposed to write? How long am I supposed to write? What, you know, I can't just write. I need more information about what the end product is supposed to look like, and on and on and on. and how that rational mind can get in the way and essentially censor insight and guidance and product or content that might arise otherwise, right? And then two, hopefully it also gave you just a quick taste of what it feels like when the rational mind is not in the way. Now, for some of you, maybe the rational mind didn't get out of the way. Maybe it was too unfamiliar, or, giving up that control, again, was unfamiliar or just uncomfortable. But hopefully some, if not most of you, were able to shut it down for just those 2 minutes that we did that quick writing exercise and just experience that flow, experience the insight and guidance, and again, the information that's just arising from someplace other than the prefrontal cortex, and help you see that there is more. Our body has more, other parts of our mind have more to contribute when we're not only stuck in our head. And of course, again, rational thinking, the rational mind, is a beautiful, wonderful tool. The point here being, it's not our only one. So let's go on to the second step insofar as how we might develop our intuition. So the first one is creating the space. The second one is paying attention. We have to make a conscious decision to pay attention, because I can create the space, I can actively cultivate mindfulness and awareness of what's going on in my body. But if I haven't decided to pay attention to what arises in that space, then it doesn't matter that I created it, right? We have to pay attention. But what are we paying attention to? Well, again, it's going to vary a little bit from person to person, but there's the corporal element, right? We say we follow our heart, we feel it in our bones, we go with our gut. Those aren't just metaphors, those are expressions that come from our lived experience. And we might also hear our intuition. Like I said a moment ago, I often describe intuition as more than a feeling, not quite a voice. Again, the only way I'm going to hear that voice, though, is if I have a clear enough head to get the messages. So again, I have to still my mind and at least stop, or at least slow the chatter. But the bottom line is that you have to have the presence to direct your awareness to the flash of insight or knowing, however it arises. You have to pay attention. What might this mean in the workplace? Well, I might just know that something is wrong with the numbers of my presentation, even though I've gone through them and validated and verified them multiple times. I might still have this gut feeling at home that night that something's off, something's awry. And then I go back and I listen to that feeling and I realize, oh, I was so caught up in what was going on today that I missed that key mistake, right? So it behooves me to pay attention to that. Or I might have this feeling in my gut at a meeting that I really need to speak up, even though maybe I ordinarily wouldn't, or maybe it's a context where ordinarily I wouldn't speak up. And I do, and then I realize, oh, there was a really good reason that I did, and it was good that I did. Those are just a couple easy examples, right? But there's another issue, there's a key issue relative to paying attention. And that is perhaps the biggest challenge that we face when we're trying to open to our intuition, is this conflict between what we feel and what we think, right? If we can't explain it rationally, our reflex is often to dismiss it, right? Our rational mind can prevent us from paying attention. It can rule out that intuitive insight before we've had a chance to take a closer look, because it doesn't make sense. And hopefully, again, that's part of what you got just a quick taste of in that free writing exercise, how the mind can come in and kind of shut things off. And that, again, is why paying attention, the second step, is a choice as well as a conscious action. It just doesn't happen on its own. Okay, third step is learning to distinguish. Well, what are we distinguishing? As we start to tune in more to the voice of our intuition, we realize there are other voices competing for its attention. What are those voices? The voices of our doubts and our fears, and the voices of our hopes and our desires. So how do we distinguish which is which? Well, we ask, are my doubts or desires at the root of what I think I'm hearing? Am I invested in what I think I'm hearing? If I'm not, if my ego isn't involved, there's a much better chance that it's actually my intuition. But that requires honesty with ourselves. It requires objectivity. And it requires practice. Again, like I said, this doesn't necessarily happen overnight if it's new for you. So how might this third step play out in the workplace? Well, I might tell myself that my intuition is telling me I shouldn't ask for that promotion. But maybe really I'm just afraid to ask for that promotion, and it's not my intuition. I'm telling myself it's my intuition to give me that validation. I'm telling myself what I want to think, when really my intuition might be saying, no, you need to go for this. It's out of your comfort zone, but that's part of the point, and you're going to get it if you ask for it, go for it, right? Or I might tell myself I have an intuition that my project's going to end on time, and really that's just because I want to think that. I'm not being honest with myself, right? Really, my intuition might be saying, you know what? Again, you need to check your milestones and your issues log, and there's stuff that you're overlooking, right? So sometimes we can be our own worst enemies and tell ourselves what we want to hear. We can tell ourselves it's our intuition, but really we're invested. Um, you know, I just used that example when I was in the car and had that mountain lion experience. What I did without thinking was, I thought to myself, wait, I don't want to pull over, right? I wasn't invested in pulling over to the side of the road. I wasn't afraid to pull over to the side of the road. And so that was sort of a litmus test for me whereby I realized, wait, something else is going on here, right? So I think that's a good way often, if we're not sure, of helping to sort of isolate and confirm whether it's our intuition talking or what we're just telling ourselves what we want to hear or what we're afraid of. Okay, the last step here is developing trust, because oftentimes our intuition is going to urge us or encourage us to do things in the moment that don't make sense, right? That's part of its very nature. It's going to ask for us to, or invite us to step into the unknown. It's going to ask us to pull over to the side of the road without explaining why, right? And we're going to wonder, are we losing it? And that can be daunting, right? Stepping into the unknown can be daunting, and it's why so many of us resist it. It gives us a false sense of control to cling to reason. But we overlook so often the fact that we're not always the best users of reason either, right? And both, whether we're using our intuition or reason, there's the opportunity for mistakes, right? But especially in the business world, we're taught to exercise as much control as possible, to manage expectations and assess risk and mitigate risk and make contingency plans. So trusting a feeling in my gut when I don't have reason to know that it's necessarily, concrete reason to know why it makes sense can be really uncomfortable. So how might I do that? Well, I always say that developing my trust in my intuition is like developing a trust with a friend. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens again over time. So if you and I just meet, I'm not going to open my heart to you and tell you my deepest, darkest secrets, right? I'm going to see if you show up on time the first time we meet for coffee. Then I'm going to see if you keep a promise. And then maybe over time, I might open up more and more, and I might trust you with bigger, things that are going on in my life. Well, it's the same with intuition. I'm not going to, in the workplace, I'm not going to, after this call, go out and make a career-defining decision based on my intuition if this concept and experience is completely new to me. I might start paying more attention to what's going on in my body in meetings, to those urges I might have, to those gut feelings, to what I'm feeling in my bones, to that voice in my head again. And just sort of playing around with that and getting more familiar with what that sounds like, what that feels like. When is that voice right? When would I have been right to go with my gut? Those sorts of things. And then beginning to take decisions and actions based on that and testing out. Wait, am I making this up, or is something going on here? Am I really starting to connect? So those are the 4 steps. Create the space, pay attention, learn to distinguish, and what's the 4th one? Develop the trust. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about, and then I'll open it up to questions, is so let's say I develop that trust, but my intuition is wrong. And that my intuition violates my trust, right? What do I do then? What's that about? Well, the reason I'm even bringing this up is because of a question that was asked the last time I spoke to PRG. One of the questions was, well, what about when my intuition is wrong? And I had a response to that I feel like was good, but I've since given it more thought and done more research and have a sort of a longer answer now. And I'm going to approach this quickly from 4 different perspectives. So the first is a point I've already made. Actually, the first 2 are points I've already made. I'm just going to quickly revisit. One is we make mistakes with reason all the time, right? So this notion that if I go with my gut, I shouldn't because I might make a mistake. Deductive reasoning starts with assumptions. If those assumptions are wrong, everything that follows is wrong, even if my actual logic is sound. But very often it's not. Oftentimes we're not the best at rational thought, even though we hate to think of that. We hate to admit that. Now, obviously, my point here is not that if we make mistakes with reason, don't worry about making mistakes with intuition. That's not the point. I'm just trying to say that it behooves us, I think, to kind of see them on a little bit more of a playing field in that sense, a level playing field in that sense. The second point is, just like with reason, a conclusion that I come to using my intuition might be wrong, and this is kind of related to the previous point. It might be wrong not because of intuition itself. Just like with reason, my decision might not be wrong because reason or logic, deductive reasoning is wrong, or logic is wrong, but because of user error, right? So if I come to some conclusion with my intuition and it turns out that it's wrong, maybe I wasn't really listening to my intuition, as I just talked about in that third step, distinguishing the different voices, right? Third thing to keep in mind is that since my intuition is often inviting me again to step into the unknown, it might take me someplace I didn't expect, but that doesn't mean it was wrong, right? So I might think, well, I have this feeling in my gut that I need to do X, and I'm assuming that if I do X, Y, and Z are going to follow. Well, maybe I needed to do X for reasons that aren't clear yet until I do it, until I step through that door. And maybe that door takes me to some place that I wasn't expecting, but that doesn't mean it's wrong. Maybe it's a new opportunity I couldn't foresee, or maybe it's a lesson I need to learn that I wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn if I hadn't gone with my gut or followed my heart. So sometimes we could say it's wrong because it doesn't lead us to where we think it is, but it's not necessarily wrong. It might be more right than we could have possibly imagined. The last thing I'll say here is there's a more straightforward sort of case in which our intuition might be wrong. And this goes back to the unconscious intuition and that pattern matching that I talked about. Well, if that unconscious computer, to use that analogy in the background, looks at the current situation and matches it to previous situations and sees a pattern there that's actually a misfire. Maybe it's applying patterns from the past, from my previous lived experience, that don't actually match with what's going on in the current situation, then I could be off, right? So that's sort of a rational explanation of an instance in which our intuition might not be 100%, dead on. Okay, so there you have a very quick introduction to intuition in the workplace, including what it is, why it matters, and hopefully how to get more in touch with your own intuition. We have
This
12
is
minutes.
fascinating. I know.
Good,
And
good.
so I know that there's going to be questions and I want to move as quickly through them as possible so we can get more in. But there's a couple things that come to mind when as you're talking. This speaks a lot about consciousness, right? And our innate abilities that sometimes we've ignored or it was programmed out of us throughout our
Right,
life. And
right,
I think about like Greg Braden and Bruce Lipton and some of the things that they talk about is that if we pay attention to our innate abilities, they grow, right?
right,
And we
right.
learn. Intuition is something that, I know I have and I question. And I also know that my ego gets in the way. So you talked about that and that's when sometimes, and I think a lot of people struggle with this. It's like in my gut I feel something. But then it's like is it my ego that's driving? So can you talk a little bit about how to strip away the ego part?
hmm Well, so that's a bigger question, and I'll try to narrow my response to this specific context, right? I think the ego, and like you said, the part that I just spoke of, I'll just elaborate on that a little bit more, which is, um, in the moment, I have this gut feeling, right? And I think I do, like you said, maybe this is new to me, and I think I'm feeling this in my gut, but it's kind of new to me. Am I, or am I imagining it, right? Well, again, I think part of it is asking yourself, is it my ego? And how does the ego manifest? Well, again, in our hopes and desires, well, less in our hopes maybe, but in our desires and also in our fears and doubts. And so asking yourself in the moment, again, returning to my mountain lion example, am I afraid to turn off to the side of the road? Do I want to turn off to the side of the road? So asking yourself and looking at, well, what's really going on here, honestly and objectively, which again takes practice, a certain level of self-awareness, right? It doesn't just happen necessarily. And then if you're able to sort of rule those things out, then I think it's easier to say, okay, yeah, this probably it's not necessarily about me. But is the ego invested? Just asking yourself that. And then of course, in broader terms, there's lots that we can do um, to realize it's not all about us and to chip away at our ego you know, in a
Right.
broader sense that is going to facilitate that. That's sort of my short answer, I guess, to that one.
Okay, and I have tons of questions, but let's open it up. Who
Wait,
has
I just
something that
lost you, Christy.
oh, what? Can you hear me?
I suddenly don't hear you. Does everyone hear her?
I hear Christy. Do you
Okay,
hear
I
me,
hear
Okay.
Matthew?
you. I hear
Can you
Oh,
hear
you.
me?
I hear you now. Sorry. I heard
Okay.
everyone else, but not you all of a
Sorry, I
sudden.
hear
Yeah.
everybody. So everything's great for me.
Okay, thank you.
So who has a question that they want to ask Matthew? So Trina puts really valid points. For many, ego is why we accept roles after being under or unemployed and a new role when our intuition knows that it is not a good fit. So from a job search perspective, it's like we know it's not a good fit and then we take it anyway.
Mhm.
Who else? Okay, well, I'm going to grab the floor until
You keep
somebody,
going, Christy. You keep
yeah,
going,
until
Christy.
somebody raises their hand. So you talked about the quiet mind, and
Mhm.
that's one of the uh, things that I think is hardest for many. So Deepak Chopra, I remember reading in one of his books, it's like you can't see the ripples from a stone thrown in water
I love that.
unless
Yeah.
the water's still.
Mhm.
And so it's interesting. Okay, so Russ, I'm going to hold on you. You always get the floor on asking questions, but so you're going to get it after Lynn. I know. Lynn, go ahead.
I was just going to make a comment that when you make a rational decision, the outcome can be good or bad. But when you make an intuitive decision, it's the same. It isn't that an intuitive decision is always right. Like for me, I made an intuitive decision to come to the United States long, long time ago, which was right on lots of levels, but it meant I missed out on lots of things. So intuition isn't always right for you long term, just like rational thought isn't either. It's just a balance. Right.
So Russ, do you have a question? I know we have 7 minutes, so I'm trying
I
to
know it's
get
going
as
to be
much
really fast.
in.
I'm just saying, for me, it all seems like intuition is just a big blob of a mess. And I'll share something that it was actually about a now former fiance who had an intuition that I was no longer interested in her, which because we were apart, she was in China, I was in Korea, I was working in, and then came back, and it was entirely incorrect. So I think it was touched upon about something like it could end up incorrect. So I mean, it all seems like, frankly, like, pardon the term, bullshit sometimes.
Oh, wow. That's a bigger question.
Yeah.
Matthew, what do you
Yeah.
say about that?
Well, what I say about that is if she's having an intuition, quote unquote, intuition that is in fact not true because the intuition is about you and you are aware of your feelings, that probably wasn't her intuition. That was probably more about her fear. And this is what I
Yeah.
was talking about earlier and also ties directly to Christy's question a moment ago is where does the ego fit in? So that was much
Actually,
more
yes.
likely her
That's a good way to put
ego
that. Yeah.
because so that's what that was about versus her intuition. And again, she might have mislabeled that as her intuition. And hopefully, if there was clear, honest communication and trust, she would have said, "Oh, I realize this is about me. And now that you're telling me that you actually want to be with me and you love me, and this was just my fears coming up, I realize that. And by the way, it wasn't my intuition, right? Because that's a case where we can prove whether it was right or wrong or whether, and what you're saying here is that she was completely off. So I would argue I would suggest that wasn't necessarily her intuition and more about her fears and insecurities in the relationship would be my suspicion.
Yeah, true. I can confirm. I think what's based on what you said later.
Yeah.
Okay, Monica, you have your hand raised.
Hi, yeah, fascinating presentation. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for everything.
Thank you.
I feel I have very strong intuition, but over my lifetime it comes and goes. So is that I want to say it abandons me, but I know it doesn't abandon me. I just feel like I've disconnected from it. So in strengthen it or to kind of reconnect? Is that just a matter of, like you said, creating the space? Am I, how does one strengthen a disconnected sense of intuition?
Yeah, I think that it's less your intuition disconnecting from you and more about us, not, like you said, creating the space and nurturing that connection, right? I've just noticed periods in my time when all synchronicity stops and all intuition seems to kind of go by the wayside. And inevitably, that's when, again, I'm stuck in my head. My life is too chaotic. I'm not taking care of my body. I'm not sticking with my meditation practice. I'm not doing my affirmation. I'm not doing the things that I need to clear my head and be embodied. And once I get back to those practices and I calm down and my life returns to a little more sort of healthy, state of normalcy and productivity and what I'm doing, and the chaos subsides, then inevitably I sort of reconnect. And so I think that usually it's more about us, because I think our intuition, it's, whatever we're connecting with, whether it's that unconscious computer or whether it's that something greater, they're not going anywhere. Right. So I think it does come back to us and making sure that we're open, that again, we're paying attention. So I think that's, in my experience, that's how that works. Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Okay,
Thank you.
and Rochelle, just a second. Stacy Proctor adds that the PQ, the positive intelligence work with Shirzad Shamin, yeah, he's great. Is an excellent
you.
and recommended way to think about how to create the space, etc. Yes, absolutely right.
Thank you, Stacy.
Rochelle.
Sure, I have a question because what I do, I tell everybody it's an art and a science. So I think this falls in that same kind of language. So we live in a world with data and facts. How can we practically incorporate intuition and do that balancing act? Because it can't be all intuition, it can't be all data and facts. And
Absolutely.
especially if we are more of the creatives, then we're more heavily on the intuition side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I touched on that a little bit, and I'm glad you bring this point up again. The point here is that it's both, right? And I like that you talk about it as an art and a science. I'm not saying let's only be intuitive and forget about rational thinking, right? So, one example might be in prioritizing, right? Maybe I have 10 things that I need to do right now. Well, my rational mind might narrow that down really easily to 3. And then I might just use my intuition and just that one, and the 3 seem like sort of equal priorities, right? And I might just go with my gut, and I do this. I mean, in fact, this is how I work a lot of the times. I might just go with my gut because there's one of those 3 is jumping out at me. I feel that and I just go with it. I don't question it, I just move forward. So I think that's just kind of one hopefully simple example that illustrates how they can kind of come together, right? And, and we might be in a meeting, all the facts get presented, and then we have intuitive feelings about some of those facts, right? So again, the 2 are coming together. We might have done the research, we might have done some of the analysis, but maybe what that analysis is pointing to isn't entirely clear yet. And I think this is where we can also go back to Einstein, right? He's talking about how important intuition is. But that's not to say he is extremely logical, right? So he's bringing both of them into his process. So yeah, I think that again, if we're not caught up in the chatter, again, if we're embodied, we're going to get the intuitive insight when and where it matters.
And I think what you're saying, if I can jump in, I think the picture you're giving me is the data and the facts are the outside boundaries, and the intuition is the overlay, and it makes the data and the facts back into that creative place. It gives them the edge. The data and the facts alone aren't enough. With the intuition, it's kind of like a superpower.
We love to talk about
that.
intuition as a superpower. Yes.
I know. Okay, we are out of time. And Matthew, I want you to come back. I hope you will. And
I would love to come back. Thank you.
These are just great discussions. And thank you, everyone.